Ladies and gentlemen, this is reaction. This is Great Northern War. Young and Violent. Yeah, that is Charles XII. He is young and violent. Yeah. Extra history part 3 by the channel extra credits. Yeah, so in the previous part we saw that how Charles XII is still on a winning streak. Winning high basically. He's badass so far. He's leading all the fights and literally making his enemies run away every time. Augustus, I think the name of the the leader, king, emperor, whatever, I don't know who's that, from Poland, Lithuania. Basically, he every time came across Charles with his brilliant plans and got his ass kicked. In the end, he had to agree to, I guess, just give up and give up the power to the Charles XII's puppet into the Poland, Lithuania. Yeah. So in this time, I guess Charles XII is gonna go against Peter the Great of Russia. So we're back to Sweden versus Russia again. In the first part, Sweden won. Russia had to run away. In this part, I guess we're gonna see what happens next. Is Peter the Great gonna kick back? He's Peter the Great, so I don't know, maybe. So yeah. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like, subscribe, check out the reaction. There's a link in the description. Check out the cards for different playlists, check out the cards, and yeah, let's watch this one.
Two houses, both alike in dignity, in fair northern Europe. Wait a minute. With Poland-Lithuania out of the fight, Charles XII sets his eyes on another foe, the Russian giant Peter the Great. While Charles had run roughshod over Poland, Peter had taken advantage of the moment to once again assail the Baltic provinces. He was stopped short of his ultimate goal, but Peter's efforts there were not without gain. His armies carved a path all the way to the Swedish fortress of Nyenskans, which he tore down to build an even greater fortress, the Peter and Paul Fortress, which would serve as the cornerstone for his most ambitious project of all, St. Petersburg. He would erect a new city here, one grander and more modern than anything Russia had ever seen. This would be his gateway to the west, his port that tied Russia into...
Wait a minute. Did he make the Petersburg? Peter the Great, St. Petersburg? I don't know. But damn. He is Peter the Great, right? If he did that. Huh.
To the economic life of Europe. It would be his new capital, on which he would spare no expense, in treasure or lives. This was to be the culmination of his legacy, the embodiment of all his ideas on westernizing Russia, on becoming a naval power, on embracing European art and science and culture. But for that to be the case, Russia would have to succeed in holding on to these gains, something that Charles XII could not abide.
So let me get this one. Charles XII was going after Poland and Lithuania, just out of spite, because they tried to crush him when he ascended first time. So during that time, Peter the Great went and conquered some forts and built his own giant fort type thing, and then created St. Petersburg that we know of today. Damn, that is heavy.
Throughout 1704 and 1705, Swedish forces tried to take Peter's great fortress, but time and again they were repelled. Soon,
Peter and Paul Fortress. Who's Paul?
Costs started to mount, and men that could ill afford to be lost died for little gain. So Charles revamped his strategy and blockaded St. Petersburg. While the blockade dragged on, he began marshalling his main force for a march to the east. It was at this point that Russia sent him a peace offer. In return for an armistice, Russia would give up all of their gains, except for St. Petersburg and the forts connecting it to Russian territory. But Charles was having none of it. He knew how important St. Petersburg was. Why, with his invincible army, should he give it up? So Charles marched...
Yeah, exactly. That's what it is, isn't it? Young and violent. That is what the Charles XII is. Any kind of peace treaty, fuck that. I'm in a winning streak. I'm in winning high. I can do anything. Invincible Swedish army. That's what his mentality is right there. I don't know, if I were to think, I guess he's gonna lose in the end, right? Peter the Great is going to win. I don't know.
East, braving horrible weather and dangerous crossings to move with his traditional lightning speed. As he pressed forward, Peter fell back and back. Each defensive line Peter's commanders had planned to entrench was taken before their men could even unpack their spades.
Damn.
But even this march could not make up for the time Charles had lost trying to make Poland support his puppet king. In the years that had followed his initial victories over the Russians and the Polish-Lithuanian forces, Russia had not only seized and fortified what would become St. Petersburg, but reinforced it, and kept reinforcing it. Yet the Swedish army was strong. Their king was able, their officers daring and intelligent. Top members of the military thought that it would be a tough fight, but that they could take St. Petersburg. They drew up plans and submitted them to the king, who swore them to utmost secrecy about the plans they had concocted. And so the officers marched, thinking their objective to be St. Petersburg. But soon they found themselves near Minsk. Wait a minute, that wasn't on the way to St. Petersburg. Charles had marched them in a different direction, and there was only one place they could be going from there. He was marching them to Moscow. Charles's officers had told him that they were not ready, that striking so deep into Russia was simply too great of a gamble. It was something the army simply wasn't prepared for. But how many times before had Charles been told that something was too great a gamble? How often had he heard that something was impossible, only to then achieve it himself? He had made up his mind. They would not waste their time retaking lost territories. He would unseat Peter himself.
See, he's like a gambler who's on a winning streak, right? Every time taking massive chances until the end, when he puts everything on the line and loses massively. I mean, he's a kid in the end. He's a teenager. I mean, he was 14 years old when he took the throne, and since there until he became 18, he was in winning streak, just badass, basically going to the field and winning. He doesn't know how to lose. So obviously, why would he think like that? Why would he try to think strategically? Like, oh, we can't take Moscow. It's way deep inside. We are not prepared. Fuck that. You want to reinforce St. Petersburg? I'm going to take Moscow. That's what his mentality is. I guess he's going to lose, right?
The first two rivers they crossed with little opposition, being slowed only by the fact that the retreating Russian forces burnt every bridge along the way. Tartar horsemen also harassed them continually, but this seemed a minor nuisance. They were making good time through bad country. But then, at the Wabis River, they found a large enemy force barring their passage. The position held by the Russians was daunting. The Swedes would have to traverse marshy ground to get to them, and beyond that was a forest which might hide yet more troops. But Charles saw a way. The enemy line had a gap in it along a swampy area that the Russians clearly thought was impassable. Charles personally led his army across 1,500 yards of killing ground to reach this swampy area. At one point, his men were shoulder deep in water. The enemy line was split. The Russians tried to use numbers to heal the breach, but heroic actions from the Swedish cavalry prevented any joining of Russian arms. Soon the line began to collapse. The crossing was theirs. Once again, the Swedes had triumphed against impossible odds. But keen observers...
Yeah, Charles won against impossible odds because this kid is badass, right? Even though anybody watches that, he's gonna lose badly the way he's going around. But still, every time he fights, it's just ridiculous odds, and he uses some ridiculous tactics, and he wins actually.
Observers in the army would have noted that though the Swedes emerged victorious, these Russian troops were made of sterner stuff than they had been 8 years back. Tactics and firm soldiering had been hammered into them since their retreat at Narva. They would not be turning and running like that anymore. This victory left Charles's army exhausted. It would take a month of rest before he could really move them.
Okay, why do I have Napoleonic War vibes right now? This was the same shit doing that, right? I mean, Russian army fought Napoleon, get their ass kicked. Then later on, when Napoleon invaded Russia, they knew his tactics. They were more sturdier now. They were not running away as much. They knew what to do at that point. Why does this give me Napoleonic Wars type of vibe?
Them again. And during this month, Peter was not idle. Peter stripped the land bare. He laid waste to any stretch of ground that the Swedes would have to cross, and even though it was his own country, and the suffering caused to his own people was immense, Peter made no half measure of it. Every grain of wheat was carted off. Every pasture where a horse might graze...
What an asshole, right? I get it, it's war and shit, but kings just thinking about themselves and thinking about war and this useless bullshit. While he's hurting his own people, starving them basically. Without this food, they're gonna get starved.
Was turned to ash. There would be nothing but wasteland for the Swedes to traverse. Thus began a time of suffering for the Swedish forces. When they resumed their march, food was scarce, and with scarce food came disease. This victorious army began to march as defeated men, with hollow eyes and weary steps. Charles continued to rally them, but he had no real answer to this predicament. He had been counting on living off the countryside as they marched. Their supply lines were stretched.
He didn't thought of the scorched earth tactics right there, because this is basically like that, right? Kill off all the supplies along the way.
Beyond their limit. Many asked him to turn home, but he believed in Swedish arms. He believed that if he could just force Peter into one decisive battle, they might yet win this war. But Peter demurred. He would not give Charles the battle he wanted. And so the Swedes marched across fields of ash, seeing always in the distance villages alight, candles in remembrance to Peter's uncompromising policy of starvation. In frustration, Charles turned to his officers and asked their advice. They recommended that the army fall back to the Dnieper and meet up with a relief force laden with supplies. But this would be tantamount to giving up the campaign, so Charles asked for other options. Reluctantly, it was suggested that the Ukraine had not been as thoroughly plundered. It might be possible to gather supplies there and enlist the aid of friendly Cossacks. But such a move would cut the army off from any real ability to communicate with Swedish territory or get resupply from the Empire. Still, Charles saw it as a possible path to victory where retreat offered none. His officers pleaded with him to at least wait for the relief force and their provisions. But Charles, fearing that further delays would only give Peter more time, turned.
Yeah, Charles is basically the guy without any safety net. He always does shit that if it fails, it fails really badly. So far it hasn't failed, but yeah, cut off the contact with Swedish, Swedish country and everything. Fuck that. This feels about right.
Turned the army toward Ukraine immediately. They would now retrace their steps until they could turn south, walking back across the same blasted waste from which they had just come. But as summer gave way to autumn and autumn to winter, a chill set in. Then a deep cold. Then a freezing, bone-gnawing frost. And not just any frost. This was what is known today as the Great Frost, the coldest winter Europe has experienced in 500 years. Rivers froze.
Historians do not have creativity, right? Just put the great word on front of everything.
From the Thames all the way down to the lagoons of Venice. And this frost served Peter well. By the time the winter of 1708 and 1709 came to an end, Charles had only 20,000 remaining men able to fight, less than half the number he'd begun this campaign with. Half of his undefeated army lost. But there's still hope yet. Join us next time to find out what happens to his reinforcements, to the Cossacks Charles hopes yet to enlist.
Yeah, this is like Napoleonic Wars, man. Damn. Winter always serves Russians, right? This is like that, making sure that, enemy chases all the way to Moscow and, making sure not to engage the enemy before then. Winter comes, the enemy becomes more weaker, more far inland in Russia, more far away than their own country. And then Russia attacks. And then, enemy runs away, which I think is going to happen in the next part. Well, Charles is going to retreat and run away while Russians chases. This is like Napoleonic Wars, damn. The scorched earth mentality, they also used that in Napoleonic War, if I'm remembering correctly. Right? Yeah, they did that too, to starve them. Damn, this is just effed up. Alright, that was Great Northern War, young and violent. I feel like, Charles's winning streak is about to over here. But still, the kid is so badass, right? And even when battle actually happens, it's not like he's just in some kind of a luck winning streak. He actually, spearheads the war and actually wins with some, ridiculous tactics that nobody thinks of. I can't do it. People are like, he can't do that. Oh, I'm going to do that. And he actually does it. Damn. All right. If you like my next one, like and subscribe. Check out the Rick Sunday. There's a link in the description. Check out the cards or play. Check out the end cards. And I'll see you next time.